Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Skye's Fall by Will Forrest. Alrighty, so let me introduce you to a really fun little book with some cool characters. Skye's Fall is the story of a man named Jamie Skye. He has been kidnapped by a pair of disreputable magic users. The man who seems to be in charge is Lord Sandover, a foppish man who insists he's immortal, is able to make people feel horrible pain, and takes disturbing pleasure in causing that pain. And then there's Carrie Robb, a man whose magic is tied to the land, and who clearly has no desire to be involved in any of this. He's being forced to help Sandover by an evil duke, who sent him to kidnap Jamie Skye. Jamie has inherited his familial power of being naturally able to manipulate water, and so might be the only person who will be able to find the monster hidden in one of the world's biggest lakes. But on their voyage from England to North America, Skye and Robb bond, and soon what should have been a straightforward quest that no one really wanted to be involved in will be complicated by the immensely difficult emotions of two men who aren't exactly used to building relationships with others. Okay, so there are many things about this book that I absolutely loved. I love the characters. I'm a sucker for characters that are full of emotional scars. Like, give me a character barely beginning to get over their trauma of being falsely accused of being insane and repeatedly institutionalized, and I'm in. Then you give him overwhelming, barely controlled magic power, and like, that is candy to me. Also, add another character who is racked with guilt for one stupid mistake that had him banished from his home and may have deeply damaged his people, like, who also has great magic potential that he feels he has never lived up to. Like, hell yeah, these are my kind of characters. And then make them fall in love, and I am head over heels for a book. Like, that is all great. And then to make it even more interesting, this is a non-sexual love. It's an ace romance. Like, they are in love with each other, but it's platonic love with each other, and I'm really here for it. And on top of that, a lot of the characterization is built through them being witty and snide and playful, and like, that is candy to me. There's a reason I like Marvel movies, and it's not the splosions. It's the witty banter. And I've said it before, and I will say it again. I really actually do love a really evil bad guy. Like, there are people in the real world who don't give a shit about hurting people, or even who take pleasure in hurting others. And I think it's perfectly realistic to include them in books. Also, it just makes it more fun to not have to worry about the antagonist's feelings and be like, oh, but is he right? Let's think about it deeply. No, he's just a dick, and it's fun. And then I also love the fact that in this book we get to see different kinds of just uncomplicated evil. Like, we have the sadistic evil who just is abusive and petty, the cold, implacable evil that you can't really comprehend, and we even get the distant, powerful evil that there is no fighting. It's all lovely. I will say personally, I would have liked to have spent a little bit less time with Sandover in particular, just because he's not a fun character to spend time with. And I understand why we spend a lot of time with him. It makes sense in the narrative. He is set up as the direct contrast to Robb, so it is the, like, this is the gentle, kind one, this is the evil one. But it was necessary for the storyline. I just didn't like him as a human being. And that did make it fun in the end to see him brought low, but it's not enough for me to be like, yeah, let's spend that much time with him. And also the side characters in this book really stood out to me. I loved all the random, the wilderness guides in particular. And like, there are other side characters throughout the book, but the wilderness guides are the ones that are like, okay, that was really strong characterization. And specifically, it's in their dialogue. Like, everything they say is just weird and wonderful and ridiculous, and it contrasts whatever everybody else is saying, and it stood out in the best way. Like, I loved them because they felt like they came from another book and just said, nope, we're doing our own thing in this narrative, and I'm all for it. And just in general, the dialogue in this book is really one of the stronger points. It is witty, it's fun, it's insightful, and it's fast-paced. Sometimes I did feel like it was a little bit too fast-paced, like I did want a little bit more description of what's going on around the dialogue, but that's a me thing. I also really liked the action sequences in this book. There was some really creative chaos going on, and it felt dangerous and emotive and atmospheric, like good action sequences do. Also, there's a lot of things in the world building of this story that I honestly have never seen in other fantasy novels. Like, the book takes place in a world that is hours plus magic, which isn't that unusual. It is hours plus magic in the colonial era, which I've seen less of, and it's the type where magic exists, it's somewhat common and acknowledged, but it's not a big enough part of society to majorly change the overall outcome of history. And I like those worlds. I find them fun. But this one took us to colonial Canada, which I have never read as a fantasy setting. And like, yeah, it turns out mixed magic with French Canadian fur trappers, and I'm like, yeah, this is cool. Tell me more. I'm here for it. I love it. Also, we have a character who's from Australia, and his magic is based in his Aboriginal heritage, which is another thing that I've never read before. Now, that one in particular, I know it does exist. I've heard in passing of books based on that, but I haven't read any, and I know it's still pretty rare. But all of this adds up to an interesting, unusual flavor to the overall story. There's a lot of new going on in this book. But all that being said, there are a few things that were a bit less to my taste in this book, and almost all of them amount to, I just wanted more straight up exposition. Like, there is so much the kind of exposition that's fed to you a bit at a time, a hint here, a sentence of explanation over here, and a lot of characters remembering a quick moment, like a split-second scene that gives us an insight into what happened in the past, or how magic works, and things like that. And I feel like that is a kind of exposition that works really, really well when you're going to a lot of different places and meeting a lot of people who are introducing new elements of what's going on, new history, and more little outside influences of how the magic works. But this book is a really tight little narrative. Like, while we are traveling, we aren't spending a lot of time exploring the new places or having deep, meaningful interactions with the people that we meet along the way. Like, mostly it is the three main characters, Carrie, Rob, Jamie, Skye, and Lord Sandover, sort of just interacting with each other. Like, there are other characters that come in, but not that much. And a lot of the places that they visit, they're spending like their entire time in that visit, like either just walking through the town quickly, or in a hotel room, or in a camp, or something like that, or even just in their cabins on the ship. And that just didn't bring in the outside influences that we need to make this kind of exposition fill in the world, if that makes sense. It just didn't give a lot of opportunity for new concepts. And so we do end up getting a lot of exposition, but it's the sort of exposition that covers the same ground a little bit and just gives us a bit more and a bit more each time it comes up, chapter by chapter, so you slowly build up an image of what's going on. And that's fine, that's great. I love that for character background, but I just wanted a little bit more straightforward, here is how the world works kind of exposition. And almost every bit of exposition in this book is through either dialogue or memory. Can I help you? Which leads me to the next thing about this book. It is very, very character-driven. And I like character-driven books, but I still want them to be plot-driven as well. And this is one of those books that a huge portion of the action really focuses on how these two characters feel about each other, whether or not they trust each other, whether or not they are ready to try to escape together, or if they're going to follow through with this quest, and like basically all about how they interact with each other. And the book just spends a lot of time in the characters' heads. And I just craved a little bit more external action to move the relationships forward and to, like, you know, build on what's going on. I wanted a little bit more wild attempts at escape. I wanted a little bit more fighting with the beast. I even wanted a little bit more of the, like, physical altercations with Sandover. And in the beginning, when they're trying to bond together and when we are building up the relationship between them, I wanted to see more of them actively working together, comrade in arms kind of action. And that would have given me the kind of exposition that I wanted as well. More fighting inherently gives more time for the ideas of how the magic work to come across to the audience. And more working together probably would have led to the direct explanations of the things that I was craving exposition for. Like, it might have come out a lot earlier what exactly the Duke wants with this monster and how he thought he was going to get it if they were having, like, comrade in arms kind of fights in the very beginning. And yeah, this is very much a me kind of thing, and the main reason that I bring it up is because, to me, since we spend so much time in the two characters' heads, it really sort of feels a bit more like a romance novel than a fantasy novel to me. And I think this is entirely on me. I'm 90% sure that this book is actually categorized on Amazon as a fantasy romance. And I know that the author primarily writes romance. This is an author I follow on Threads. I really like him. He seems nice. And so I wanted to read one of his books, and most of his books are romance. So I was like, oh, he wrote a fantasy! I'll get that! And yeah, didn't click that it will probably be very romance heavy. And yeah, that's on me. And it's not even that that's a bad thing, it's just that it's something that is not to my taste. I have discovered that I do like some romance, but it needs to be very plot driven. Also, it's on me that I think, honestly, I started this series with the wrong book. So, this is book 1. Very clear, very precisely put on the cover. I appreciate that. And it was only when I was starting to read it that I was like, I feel like there's some backstory that I don't have here. And I went and looked, and it turns out there is a book 0. And I assume that the reason that it's labeled book 0 and book 1 is because book 0 is not necessarily required to understand this story. But I do wish I had read book 0, because there is so much reference to what happened with Adrian, and so much reference to how Jamie really discovered that he does actually have magic powers and it's not madness, that I just really wish I had read that first. But once again, that's on me. That's the fact that I never want to know too much about books before I pick them up, so sometimes I am just sort of looking at an author's website and going, that one looks like fun, I buy that, without reading all the important details. And sometimes that works out wonderfully for me and I discover books I never would have discovered otherwise. Sometimes that leads me expecting something I didn't get, and it's entirely my fault. But overall, I think it would have helped me pick up more on the world building and need less exposition if I'd already read a book in this world. But overall, I found this a really fun story. It has 2 immensely likable characters who I was rooting for from moment 1. It has this sweet asexual romance, which isn't super common, so it's really fun to come across them, and it's a really interesting world. I just wanted more, basically. And on that note, there is a novella slash long short story at the back that I'm probably also going to read. I might review it next week. I might not. It depends on if I feel like there's enough meat in there to chew on. But overall, this was a fun one.